Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Citizen Bear. Again, this is a podcast about my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons, and some of the topics within the book and how they relate to our world today. And many of the settings and themes have become a little more relevant, incredibly relevant. When I wrote the book, it was a little more dystopian to kind of make a point about citizenship and faith and getting what it shouldn't take to get us back to some of our basics and our founding principles. But I think that today it's becoming a little more relevant, and I thought, it's kind of important to talk about this. We've been on a series, the last two episodes on World War III, which we're seeing in the headlines all the time. And it's becoming a little scary with some of the real absolutes that we're hearing out of people. And it's one of the hard things. We had a segment on fine lines and absolutes, and I think this is a great example of that when we get these authoritarian regimes who are starting to really talk in terms of absolutes. They become entrenched in what they want, and they become absolute, and they force people around them to start talking in absolutes. And what happens is then that they're given deadlines. We're not going to put up with you anymore, and kind of thing. And that leads to really a stalemate of people being backed up. Get their backs against the wall, and I think that it can lead to really problematic. It can lead to war, and it often has been the basis of war. But I think that unfortunately, it takes two to tango, and we've been left very few choices now by these authoritarian regimes, and I think we have to be prepared to deal with that. So, without any further ado, let's just introduce the topic. Well, I entitled this section, World War III, Everyone's Crisis. And I think this is an important point. I think next week I want to get into the economics. I'm going to touch on that a little bit inside here. But for now, I just want to take a quick snapshot and overview. Last time we talked about the internal threat, and this time I'm kind of talking about the external threat and maybe a little bit of bringing those 2 points together. So let's take a step back. And this is, very much a layman's terms, and I think today we're not really looking at it. I mean, we're left to just kind of deal with these headlines and the news reports and the conversations that are going on and how this problem is evolving all over the world. And I think we need to take a step back. Some of this is very much, an opinion or, my viewpoint on it, but it's food for thought. Some of it's very real and right out of the headlines and, some of the deeper dive on some of the little bit of research on this, some of its history. But we're taking a look at what's going on. And, particularly in our country, we just don't seem to be making this. It's kind of like a news story and kind of like what's going on here, there, and everywhere. And we cover it in small detail, but we don't really seem to be talking about it. And I think it's something that we need to kind of get our head around a little better. Maybe just a layman's point of view, I know what some of the talking heads think, but, what we think or what we see is also important. There are a lot of very talented people out there, and on this theme, we've got generals and politicians, former heads of state and all this, kind of talking about the individual points, the different places, the different groups. But for me, I see the individual areas, but I see it as part of a larger scheme, and I think this is something for our society that we need to pull together. Yes, there are individual working parts, but it's all linked in a larger theme, in my opinion, and I think most people would agree with that. And I think that's something that has to really be talked about and looked at, and we have to get our head around it if we're really going to start getting our head out of the sand and start thinking about this. It's really kind of a strange thing for us today. I was talking with my wife this morning over coffee about it, and it's amazing how frightening some of the news headlines have gotten, how dystopian some of our world has become with this, and yet we live in a very day-to-day norm where we go about life. There was a great movie, back in the 80s called The Day After, and it was about a nuclear conflict, but by the then USSR and the United States and our allies too, but it focused on the United States and the USSR. And it's a little frightening to compare some of the themes from that story to today and see some of the the things with NATO and everything else, because they covered that. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting in that movie, and it's a good watch, but it's dated, but it's a good show. A little disturbing, but worth watching, is that how much people lived in their day-to-day lives. All of this was evolving very quickly around them, and people just kind of went to the football game. They kind of went about doing their business, and nobody was really getting prepared until it was right on top of them. And we lived in denial. And that's something that I think we want more than anything to come out of this segment, this episode, is the fact that no more, we shouldn't be, we should continue to do what we need to do in our lives. We shouldn't be, going to our basements or anything. But I think on the other side of the coin, we need to get our head around this and be realistic. I think that there are three main areas. The struggle is kind of shaping up into three main groups, and I want to kind of touch on them quickly. And it kind of shows the emerging conflict. And, I'm going to just do a quick overview on the three, and I kind of want to make a couple of points here so that we can pick up on them later. And I think there's a troubling mindset, and that's why I want to touch on these and kind of set the stage for a little bit later in this discussion, because there's a mindset out there that really is not with us, but with the world. It's a little, we see it in our own society today. Let's start with the Middle East, particularly Iran. There's no hiding Iran's disdain, the leadership of Iran, I should say, and their ideological foundations, their radicalized Islam. I think that there's no hiding their disdain for the United States, and there's no hiding their disdain for Israel. I think, they also, their insecurity towards their regime is also very palatable. They worry about being able to perpetuate their regime and to perpetuate their ideological goals globally. And they do have both regional and global goals for spreading their ideological thought process. They would like to bring everyone under Sharia law, let me put it that way. The Middle East has always been kind of this critical linchpin. It links a lot of different areas, and it sits on a great deal of natural resource. So it is a pivotal and strategic area for just about everyone. And it's one reason that I think Iran has been brought into this fold and making things happen. And I think for this reason, both the insecurities, reaching their goals, is one of the reasons that Iran has sought so actively a nuclear weapon, like many other countries sought nuclear weapons. But Iran has been particularly aggressive about it, and I think it's a little scary for Iran because they are so aggressive on the global stage, being such a global sponsor of terror and looking to upset the apple cart, if you will, on the global stage and the regional stage. They want to lead, certainly their region, both politically and religiously, and they want to take control of that. And I think that's something that, one of the reasons that they want to have a superior weapon to threaten people with while protecting themselves. And we see this going on with Russia, but we're going to touch on that in a minute. But there's also the fact that this is not just a defensive thing for a country like Iran and an authoritarian regime like this. This is also a sword for them to reach their goals and to go out into the world. And it's a dangerous one because they really don't have the ability to wield this sword. They can hurt a lot of people. They can create a lot of conflict and a lot of damage, but I'm not sure that they can. I'm not sure that they can do. Picking a fight with a country like the United States in a nuclear conflict is probably not a good idea, and it would mean the end of them. So I think there's a give and take there. Lately, though, we've seen Iran being hit very hard by Israel. As they're getting close to the nuclear weapon, I think Israel feels it's time to put them back. I think the United States is more than happy to support Israel in that endeavor, and that we did. I think that we know that Israel has come down and pushed very hard on Iran and really gave him a pasting. This is a statement to the Israeli military, again, but they're great pilots and they're great military. But, they have a great deal of American equipment that is really prevailing again and breaking through air defenses and really shining, not just on paper, but in theater. And it's quite impressive to watch. But regardless of how you want to tout equipment and personnel, Iran took a pasting in this last air campaign. And not just their nuclear program, but much of their military. And the Revolutionary Guard headquarters, which was one of their shining pieces in their republic, has been pretty much turned to rubble at this point. So, we have to ask ourselves kind of a question about it, because Iran has come right back up out of the ashes of this pasting and started right back with their rhetoric, right back in the pursuit of a nuclear weapon, even going as far as to say that they're looking to obtain a weapon now from one of their allies or a willing party who will supply them with what they need, and they want to put this bomb in place, which is a little surprising to me. And I think we have to ask why a regime like this, in the position they're in, doesn't want to take a step back, take a breather, take a deep breath. Okay, maybe we went a little far, a little fast, we got a little in trouble here. We can make nice with everybody. And they can kind of take a step back. But that's not what they're doing. They're all in. And they're not just all in on taking, in this case, pressing their agenda. They're all in on military and conflict and obtaining a nuclear weapon. I mean, really, really shocking. And you have to take a deep breath and kind of ask yourself, why would you do that? Why would you do that? And I think that that's something that we should take a moment and just kind of hold that thought for a minute and say, maybe, why were they here? And I think one of the other things I want to look at with this is, with Iran too, it is so emblematic of their situation is the disdain they show for others who do not follow their ideology. I mean, it is really a palatable disdain for others. The rest of the world, really, they take it out on the United States and Israel mostly, but it is a palatable disdain. Even other Muslim countries, they really, really have this disdain. And it's a little shocking. And again, I have to say, why would you continue with that agenda after you were so badly beaten back and potentially now vulnerable to a further attack? Why wouldn't you just take a deep breath and kind of play nice for a while? Let's hold that thought. Move on. Europe, particularly Russia. We all know this story. Russia invaded Ukraine after promising to protect its borders in a nuclear deal post-collapse of the Soviet Union. And Russia broke the deal, flat out. And I think they always intended to. And it was an open invasion of Ukraine. And we have to remember something. Ukraine has always been a pivotal part. It was a pivotal part of the Soviet Union. It was a pivotal part of the Cold War. It has a great deal of natural resources. It has great farming. But it also is at the underbelly of Europe in many ways. Ukraine runs underneath Germany, Poland, and all that whole area. So it is on a flank. It creates a flank on NATO's borders. And if Russia were to take it would extend Russia's border with NATO and create a new front. In addition to that, the Ukrainian area has also been a gateway into Russia. It's one of the land bridges into Russia, the other being through the Poland-Baltic area. There's a land bridge. This is why Russia's also a little paranoid about it, but it's not an excuse for what they did. No one's looking to invade Russia. NATO is anything but, and the European Union, anything but. As a matter of fact, the European Union was working very comfortably with Russia for a long time in trade. So we see Russia continuing to get more aggressive, and the United States, especially under this new administration, has really said, like, look, we want to end the war, and we want to give you a good deal. And Russia hasn't taken any of it. They've continued the war, and they've gotten more aggressive in their war with Ukraine. But they've also begun to posture against other European countries, NATO countries, the Baltic states, which were once under the Soviet Union. They want to recapture some of this. Some of it is political posturing, like you saw in the land posturing, like we saw in the early part of World War II with Hitler trying to get into other countries, quietly walking his way in, or military creep, in Czechoslovakia and other places, so that he was in a better military position to launch attacks on the next level of his war in Europe. And I think, and also he called it room to live. He wanted to expand Germany, but I think that's part of it. There's no question about that. But he also wanted resources, people, and under his control. But he also put him the countries he got put him in a very good position to attack Poland and other areas. So we see Russia kind of jockeying on that. Right now, Lithuania, one of the Baltic countries, is really apparently on the high alert with that, but it represents a very strategic place for Russia with a bridge to a lot of its naval areas and stuff like that. So, and also for NATO and the European countries. So one reason they may want to try to move on that. There is no doubt that in Europe today, all of the European countries, including the Nordic countries, are very, very clear about Russia's intentions. All of the intelligence communities make it very clear that Russia is not just saber-rattling, but making preparation for further conflict in Europe. It's a kind of a terrifying thing. We have to remember that, once again, Russia really isn't succeeding that well. I mean, admittedly, the NATO allies have been pouring a lot of resources into Ukraine, but Ukraine is fighting back on this, and Ukraine started fighting back day one. And we talked about that a long time ago with other topics here, but, Russia ain't exactly prevailing. They're kind of in a grind war of attrition at this point. And the question is, why would you continue with that? Why would you risk your regime? Why pound down, grind down your population, your economy? Russia's moving its economy into a wartime production, and more of its economy is becoming wartime production, which has very serious implications in things like inflation and other things, and its ability then to transition back into a peaceful economy is going to be very difficult. We have to ask ourselves, why is he doing this? This war is becoming very unpopular in Russia, from what I understand. But yet he's still looking to recruit, and he's still looking to get people on more and more military personnel. And it's a heartbreaking tragedy for everyone involved, including the Ukrainians. But Russia seems determined at all cost, even in the face of receiving a face-saving, really great deal, land for peace kind of thing, keeping Crimea and all this other stuff, and a land bridge into it. He turned the deal down. He not only turned it down, he slapped President Trump in the face with it. And you have to kind of wonder, again, why do you do that? Why are you fighting that? Why wouldn't you take a deep breath? NATO is gearing up now. Everyone is preparing against him. And ultimately, in a conventional conflict, he has no chance against NATO. None. I mean, he hasn't really stood that great a chance against Ukraine. And so you have to kind of look at that and say, well, he's depending on his nuclear weapons to threaten his way into everything. Well, NATO has nuclear weapons too, and that's kind of a lose-lose scenario. I don't see why that is such a prevailing idea or such a great idea. No one would. No rational mind would. But Putin is, and the Russian Republic is pressing forward with it. It is arrogantly continuing this campaign. We have to ask ourselves, at this point, why? And I think that then finally, we want to turn our way over to China and North Korea. I consider North Korea to be really just a regional proxy of China. And they kind of go hand in hand. But we're seeing large threats from China now, not just against Taiwan, but against many other nations in the area. The Philippines are under direct threat all the time. They're being pushed out of their own region and their own borders and forced back. They're threatening Japan and over islands and other areas. And this is a full court press on the Chinese part to dominate the South China Sea region and everything within a certain arc in that area so that they can control that range and use it as a jumping off point to other regions, just like Japan did in the early World War II. I think that this is something that we have to really take a look at now. Now, China's been a little more cautious and wants to be a little bit more of a team player. It has some bigger interests in the world stage. But clearly, their military buildup and their posturing, both on the world's political stage, the geopolitical stage, and also just militarily in their region, is very clear, very profound, and very scary. And it's meant to be. On the other hand, for China has a real problem. I don't know that China is as ready for this war as it would like to think it is. China has never really proven its ability to field or extend its power and use its influence globally and maintain that force of its power, military power, globally. The United States is really the only country, and with the support of our allies particularly, is really that the free world is really that power, NATO, if you will, or NATO plus, if you will, has really made that ability where we can extend power globally, anywhere, anytime, and it's been demonstrated over and over again. China hasn't really broken out with that. And even though it has weapons that can reach globally, it doesn't mean that it can extend its power globally and support that power long term in a place or places around the world, which really kind of keeps it contained into the regional area it's in right now. And I think for economic reasons, not just military reasons, China has a problem. It may be very powerful in its own backyard, but that's it. And so I'm not sure that they have that ability to maintain extended power. And so do we really need to defeat them militarily? Well, yeah, I suppose. But we also have the ability to just blockade them. You know, nothing goes in, nothing comes out. And we can be well outside their reach to do that. And sit there, and while their ships will eventually become like fish in a barrel, driving around the South China Sea, eventually they're going to start getting attrition, and their economy is going to be bankrupt. China has built itself, all of its success has been built on cheap labor and manufacturing for the Western world. And that is, first of all, the Western world is starting to pull back on that a little bit, but I think that China's economy has also started to stumble with all of its spending and programs and other things. And as a result, it won't take much to drive them into a very, very difficult place. And I'm not sure that that's really in their benefit. A country that has been prospering and thriving and growing on the world stage, why would you give that up for military conquest now? Why would you do that? China, to me, it seems the smart play for China is to continue to build wealth, continue to build prestige, and continue to build political influence in the world, and let things move in a direction and let a reset start. And I think one of the reasons they fear that is they don't want to have to change too much. They want their ideology, their way of living to dominate the world. And I think that, we see both in Russia and China this kind of disdain for how others really want to live. And, in Putin's Russia, it's more of a contempt for European nations and the United States. In China, though, I think that you see a little bit of this disdain or this contempt for other people, and these people who don't want to really join their way and want them dominating their geopolitical, socioeconomic lives. And it's very understandable. So I want to hold this thought again, just asking why on these three things and looking at some of the irrationality. Not that any war is ever really completely rational, but sometimes they need to be fought back on against aggressors like this, and we've seen that in the past. I want to take a quick step back, and first of all, let's talk about the book a little bit on this. My friend Bear lives with what is World War III, and I talked about it in the book, and it is a China-Russia coalition that starts and really aggressively pursues this. And Bear is driven from his home by a very sudden, very rapid begin to World War III. And he also has to reflect on the fact that maybe he was living a little in denial with this. Maybe he felt a little too safe and a little too secure living in America in the center, but protected by two oceans, as many people around him did. And the quick onslaught of it was very awakening, very shocking, and it caused very fast decisions to be made. And a lot of people were driven from their homes and forced out of that, and he had to make some very difficult choices. And he chose to stand up and fight back. He chose to rise above society and the norms of society and say, we're going to walk the path of our forefathers, and we're going to fight back. Now, from kind of a literary sense, some might ask if Bear is the personification of Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch. And I would say to that, Bear only represents the Übermensch in so much that he doesn't see it in himself. He sees it in you, all of you, everyone around him who joins his cause. The people who choose to fight back and stand for their rights. This is the nature of free society. It's not about one person, not one superhuman, but rather the nobility of the common man. It is about what we do as individuals, what is in our hearts and our souls, that we come together and rise together to meet such challenges. And in our real world, this is very realistic and is what we have done in the past. We have seen this great effort in prior wars and prior world wars and prior confrontations, including the Cold War. I think that we have to consider some things with this. We know that these actions aren't going well for Russia and China and certainly Iran, and we have to wonder what they're thinking and trying to sustain it. And I suppose, like Iran, I don't even think we need to really talk about these knuckleheads much. I mean, good Lord. Their economy is only saved, their republic is only saved by the fact that they sell oil and the pretty much black market to China. China, for a multitude of reasons, is having its own problems again, and we talked about that. So I have to kind of think, and Russia too. And all of this leaves kind of these regimes with a weighted choice between soldiering on and ultimately escalating things into what may be an all-out hot war, or pulling back and weighing the issues with being temporarily capitulating and regrouping, if you will. Neither offers a great choice for the three of them when you consider some of the pride and the haughty spirit involved in what they want to do. And another thing that may affect their choices is the political climate within the United States, and that is a very important thing. Particularly the Trump administration now has really stood up to this and is really building a coalition, but is also offering an olive branch through what I think someday may be the Trump doctrine or the Trump philosophy out there of through mercantile and through trade, we can really work a positive future, and none of this is really necessary. And everybody can give a little bit, and the world is changing, and we're in kind of this reset period of time anyway. So, just because we're in a reset, though, doesn't mean It's like kind of like your computer, when you get new stuff coming in and it kind of just needs to be updated, you restart it. You don't throw the computer out, right? Well, China, Russia, and Iran want to throw the computer out. They want to give you their computer. And that's not what we're doing here. Regardless of what their choices are, what they really want and what this really is about is not about just making a deal or doing something else. It's very clear that what China and its friend or ally or whatever, unlikely ally, Russia and China and Iran are doing is looking to unseat the post-World War II order, of which the United States is the leader. But the Western world runs this, and we have looked to spread democracy and looked to uplift the rest of the world throughout that. And they're great policies, and the world has come a long way with them. But we are in a time of looking to reset and restructure. That's very clear with economics and with trade and with even some social issues. We're taking another step there. But it has to be managed properly. But for these authoritarian regimes, they see an opportunity to wipe away the free world, wipe away free society, and really implement it really to the favor of their own authoritarian kind of regimes. Now, I kind of encourage you to hold a thought on some of this, and this is what we're beginning to talk into and why they want to continue this. And I think the answer is there's been this long-standing program of a new world order. And I have to tell you, I for my part, and I think a lot of people's part, we really looked at this new world order as kind of this, they're going to modify free society and, you're going to love it kind of thing. Everybody's going to be happy. We're going to do things differently, but you're all going to be happy and not much is going to change, And a new way forward, kind of a New Deal thing. And that's not really what you're getting here. It's becoming a little clear to me that it's not China's New World Order as opposed to the New World Order. It's one New World Order. They're both working on the same thing. And that's a little frightening when we consider the fact that maybe some of the people within our own country and some of the people within our allies' countries have been working on kind of bringing this New World Order together. And yes, it means that China and countries like China are going to have to be a little more free trade, and they're going to have to be a little more economic. But on the other hand, they're going to have to, kind of allow a little more liberty in their country. People can come and go a little easier. But on the other side of the coin, we kind of wipe away all this democracy, Jeffersonian democracy of, republics and all this stuff and free society, and get rid of that. Just give people the illusion of having some, freedoms, if you will, kind of parchment promises and stuff like that. But they're really living under an authoritarian kind of government that can react and shake and shift and enforce things very quickly. That's a really scary thought, because you're not just talking about changing society or evolving. You're talking about wiping away free society here and really just giving an illusion. And I think that we've been working towards this for a long time. And I think we need to be a little cautious. It really kind of dawned on me that this was not about two alternating new world orders or three alternating new world orders. This is about one new world order or free society. And I think that the reason they won't back down, and the reason that China, Russia particularly, and even Iran as part of this coalition will not back down is not because it's a good idea. It's because they have no choice. They've committed to unseating the U.S. and Western allies as the leaders of the world order, and they want to change that world order, and they want to replace the U.S. and our allies as the leaders of that world order, fashioned after their own countries. And I think there are many within our countries who have wittingly and unwittingly found a way to join in on this, support it, in the belief that they will probably gain some favor. We're looking at countries that have oligarchies now, and Many of them believe that, by enriching themselves in this process and being part of the 1% class, that they will end up converting themselves into an oligarchy class, or maybe even becoming part of this leadership. And I think that's a big fool's errand, because it never really happens. It's kind of like people like Goering believing that they've established not just themselves but their families, in leadership roles in the 1,000-year Reich. And that didn't work out, did it? And a lot of time, these people, when you live in an authoritarian regime and you live in a totalitarian society under one supreme leader with no checks and balances, you could be here today, but you could be gone tomorrow. You can fall out of lots of people in a lot of these countries. Stalin's Soviet Union, China over the time, and all other places in the world. Lots of people have fallen out of favor very, very quickly. Ask Trotsky, if he was alive. I think that this is a real problem for these three countries. The veil is off. They've started this process. They've engaged Ukraine. They've engaged Israel. They've engaged in the Middle East. They're engaging in the South China Sea. They have started the military unseating of the world powers as it is. And they can't quit. If they back off now, they can slow it down. They can modify their conduct a little bit, but they're not going to quit. This game is afoot. They have started this process, and they believe the time to act is now. And it is very clear to me that this is something that is taking shape. What will be the spark? Much like in World War II, we watched Hitler go across Europe, and finally there was the moment when he went into Poland, and the Allied powers had to say, no more. We're actually at war with you. You have to stop. And that led to really what the beginning of at least the hot war of World War II globally. It brought Japan brought the United States into that war, but ultimately it had kind of begun. And then in the Pacific, Japan had the same kind of thing going. And I think we're looking at that trigger moment. This game is afoot. The question is, Putin right now seems to be the big guy for that trigger in Europe. And I think this is a very strategic idea. They are also looking at the fact they are so embrazened by it because they believe that ultimately China will also move on this, and it will create a three-front war for the United States and for our allies, which is a lot for us to handle. And we've kind of downsized our military a little bit over the years and stuff like that. Everyone's taken a peace dividend after the Cold War. And we are still a very, very powerful force with a lot of momentum and a lot of great people. And we're not to be trifled with, and we've proven that time and time again. But it will stretch our resources, particularly in the early parts of that. That's something we cover in the book. It's part of the strategy in the book, and it's part of how Bear's militia movement, his organic movement of people to fight back, is so important to this, and really not just important in the sense that they're fighting back against people that are on his soil, meant to destroy our will to fight and to keep us from being able to engage in the larger conflict. But it also is a very emotional concept that their ability to fight back and to win really sends a message to both our allies and our enemies. I don't know how this evolves. None of us really do. I don't know that we have all the answers because, frankly, the enemy gets a vote. But right now, Vladimir Putin seems to be in that major chess move position where the ultimatums have been put to him and he's been told he's running out of time. And I think he has to start making some choices. And I'm not sure what those choices will be, or if he's going to take a step back or take a step forward. But we have to understand, regardless of what he does, they're not going to quit. They're not going to back down. They may delay, but they're not going to back down. And right now, while we're looking at Russia and Europe as being a real potential for triggering this war, don't underestimate the ability of Iran or even China to trigger this off. in a surprise moment. So we need to be prepared for this. And that's not for me or you or other people to worry about. We've got great people who are just tremendous and have proven themselves time and time again. We have an amazing, you can criticize any one person or any one event, but I have to tell you, we have a great group of leaders in the Pentagon and in our intelligence community and our government who really, when the chips are down, get together on these things, and they really think these things through, and they're often far more prepared than they want to let on. So I'm going to put my complete trust there. But I think that we as a people need to get our head around the fact that Europe is preparing for this conflict very much, and we've talked about that in the past. The Middle East is very much preparing for that conflict, and I think with the U.S.'s support. And we've put Iran back on their back heels, so that front is gravely impaired for this action. And the Russian front, frankly, is somewhat impaired too, but that doesn't mean they're not willing to engage it to tie up forces. And then we get the South China Sea. So we could be stretched very thin. We could be surprised very quickly, as my friend Bear was. But I also think we as a society needs to be prepared. One of the things that we can do is start to put ourselves together on this. I think one of the things that also concerns me is part of this preparedness and the mindset is we have seen within our own country this mindset, this disdain for anyone who dislikes their ideological purpose. And it was a little shattering, and some people got on the bandwagon and then they got off, and I think the American people are onto it and really have identified it and have rejected it openly, but that doesn't mean they're going away. Again, we're watching a political party in the far left of the Democratic Party. We're doing the same thing that we're seeing overseas. Why would you continue with a failed policy that's so bad and so out there? The American people have so clearly rejected, and the pendulum is so clearly swung away, and yet they stay with it. And I'm not trying to pick on everyone in the Democratic Party because I think there are good people in the Democratic Party, and I think they need to fight hard to get their party back because this far left movement that is right now controlling that party has doubled down on this. And you have to ask yourself again, why would you? I mean, in America, we've always had discourse. We've always had difference of opinions. We've had policies. We have new planks in our platforms, and we look for things, and we try to find a way forward. And that's a good, healthy thing because the American people then decide, where they want to emphasize their political interests right now. But it is so clear that this far-left movement is not a viable party for America, particularly at this time and place, and yet they keep doing it, and you have to ask yourself why. And I think that the reason for that is not because it's bad politics, but because on some level or another, they have committed to this New World Order concept, and they're all in. They can't back down on it now. They can't back out. They have to bring America to the table. They have to open the gates to the enemy. And that is what is really happening with this. That's my opinion on it. That's the way I see it. And now I think there are people out there on the far left who may be very unwittingly involved in this because they feel they've got some agenda item that dovetails into this. But I have to tell you, the overall concept and the aggressiveness of many of these people and the willingness to really break our laws, commit crimes within our country, to lie to the American people so bold-facedly, almost on a psychopathic level, is just frightening. And you wonder why they would continue to double down on that, why they would go so far to risk so much. And we're seeing some of that being outed right now. And why would you do that? And the answer is because you are so deeply committed, in my opinion. You are so deeply committed in this movement for this new world order that this time of change is afoot. The destruction, the elimination of our Constitution and our society is really, really the stepping stone for this new world order. Let me tell you, America is the big obstacle. So let me just kind of wrap up a couple things in conclusion here because don't want to overbeat the point. If we really want to look at both the external and the internal issues and we want to take care of this, we have to start hiding our head in the sand, and we have to stop living in denial. We can go about our lives and we can do our things, but we have to start addressing this and saying no more. We're not going to support it, and we're really against it. We have to really make that clear in the ballot box and in the jury box, as we've talked about in the past. And we can't be afraid to stand our ground with the cartridge box if necessary, but preferably we always need to first use the soapbox, and as you said, even the coin box went from time to time. So let us not be caught off guard. Let us not be unrealistic. And we have to prepare on an individual level. We must do what we can to be prepared, because none of us should be a weak link in our society. If we get cut off, if something happens, if there's temporary power outages or anything else, we need to be prepared to sustain ourselves and to take care of business so that we are not a burden on the rest of society, or if we are, it's a mild burden. We have to regain the courage, and the resolve of our forefathers. We have to not be willing to bow our heads to this or be afraid. We can't just hide behind anything from our faith. We have to use our faith to strengthen our courage, not to hide behind. We also have to understand that we are the principal target. We are that large obstacle for this world order to reach its goal. And the Constitution of the United States is the greatest obstacle. The American people are the greatest obstacle, and they have to overcome them. That's one reason I believe that, especially in a time like this, attempting to take people's firearms away from their guns away is tantamount to treason. Disarming the great American militia is tantamount to treason. We have many advanced systems and many abilities to protect this country, and we do still have two oceans around us, but we shouldn't underestimate the long reach. Even though they may not be able to sustain an expeditionary force well in the country, that doesn't mean they can't launch attacks against it, and from cyber to missiles, and we should understand that we're not out of reach anymore. We have to harden ourselves and get our head around that concept. Nor should we be fooled by those in the political positions or the talking heads. We just can't see anyone who is willing to join in and support the problems, the rioting and other issues within our country, turning our society and our values upside down. We cannot see people who are joining in with this new world order, giving it support in our country or externally as a viable option. We just can't. We need all of our politicians. We may have different views. We may want to go about things differently, and that's healthy. We should continue to debate and have discourse. That's not a weakness. China sees that as a weakness. That's a strength. It has always been our strength. And we have to hope that the Democratic Party can regain its values and regain control of a more moderate stance and get back to really supporting its constitutional issues and do better. And we have to start, again, all people, all parties have to start getting back to revolving around a true center in this country, where the American people are, not where their ideological views are. So I commit to all of us. Let us be happy and go about our lives and be strong. Double down on your faith, not your ideology. Double down on your belief in who you are and your country. And be prepared. We hope for the best, we prepare for the worst, and we take care of each other, always. Next time we're going to talk about economics and some of the bigger things about this and kind of talk about some of the views, and it's an important part of this process, not just World War III, but where our world has been, where it's gone, and where it's going. Thanks. See you next time.